Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply. Let's have fun with a project. We've got a relatively simple project, but we've got two beautiful leathers and a very cool border design. All right, so anything I use in this video, weaverleathersupply.com, or check below. We've got links there, going to take you straight to the website. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So let's step over to our pattern table, get started. We've got a simple pattern and a beautiful design. Let's have fun with this one. We've got digital picks. We'll look at those shortly, but here's what we're doing. So on our main body, we're going to cut two. We'll sew this together face to face, reverse that. That's going to give us our clutch. We're going to use a spring frame, or technically a facile frame. We're going with the 11-inch. We have these in multiple sizes. Make this your own, absolutely. But when we order these, if we order an 11-inch, that's exactly 11 inches long. So what we need to do is come in 1/2 of an inch from either side on our pocket. There we are. So therefore, we have room to set the frame as well as room for that hinge to move. We've got an additional length there on our flap. We're going to bring that over and drop in our heart design. Okay, let's go to a digital pick of our main body. Here, we're going 11.5 inches wide, or about 30 centimeters. On our height, technically, we're going 6 inches for our pouch, 3 3/4 of an inch for our flap, or roughly as an overall length, about 25 centimeters. We've got our 2 1/2-inch cuts there to allow for our facile frame. Okay, when we jump over to our design, we're going to use 3 tools here. So we're going to use a 1-inch English point for our outside punch, 5/8 of an inch English point for our inside punch, and then a 5/16 inch, and we're going to punch that twice. That's going to give us our heart design. So again, nothing complicated here. Let's step over to our main table, cut some leather. For those of us who are new to the craft, this is one of the biggest problems in leather craft. It's not a lack of options. There are too many options. Here's what I'm talking about. So right here, we're going to use an exterior leather and basically a liner. We'll talk about those. But here's where I'm going with this. So right here, at Weaver, we've got at least 10 kinds of leather that would make a great clutch. Of each of those, we've got 5 colors. So there's 50 types of leather. We're going to add in a second piece of leather. In our suede, we've got 28 colors of suede. 28 times 50, that's over 1,400 possible combinations. So you can see why this becomes the hardest part. So for us, we're going to go with a top grain, 3 to 4 ounce. This is our Redrock Rust. Love this. It's got a good rustic look to it. Over here in our suede, this is the hardest part because we've got some gorgeous colors. We're going to go with the aqua on our rust. That's going to be a nice touch. Okay, so on our pattern, I will typically make my first pattern out of poster board. It's easy to mark, it's inexpensive, but once we make a project with that pattern, we know it's a good pattern. Let's transfer that over to our pattern sheeting. This makes a good pattern. It's easy to cut, easy to mark, but it's also durable. So on this, we're going to use a smaller awl. This is going to give us a good line. We need to be as clean and accurate on our pattern as we can be, both marking and cutting. Good, we've got that. Now we need to cut 2 up, so let's trim this out. Now, as always, new blade or sharp blade, and again, let's do our best to cut that right on our mark. And we can, over here, if we want to, we can square against this line just to make sure everything on this is square. Good, we've got those cut. Let's see how they meet up. Just about perfect all the way around. Now, a big point. If you do not have a perfect meet over here, that's not an issue because we're going to sew this. Then we'll flip this around. That's what we'll see. So again, if that's not absolutely perfect, we're okay. Let's reset here and cut a strap of our suede. We don't have a pattern on this simply because all we need is 2 2-inch by 10.5-inch bands of suede. So let's start with a good straight edge. Cut out 2 bands. Good, we've got 2 bands there, 2-inch by 10.5. So let's step over to our punch table. Let's drop in our border design. We're not going to punch our suede just yet. We'll come back to this. Now we're going to use 3 tools here. One is common, one is uncommon, and one is almost obscure. The point with this, go with whatever tools you have in your shop. There's no telling what you can come up with. Now, we'll look at some options here shortly, but for right now, let's start with our 1-inch English point. Now, across our top here, we're at 10.5 inches. We could mark our center point absolutely, but we're going to see that. So let's start with our 1-inch English point, 5 1/4. That's our center point. So I'm going to come in just a hair, maybe 1/8 of an inch from our edge, and I want to center the point on 5 1/4 inch. So let's punch right there. Okay, good. Now we can remove our straight edge, because now I'm going to put the very corner of this tool as best I can right in the corner of the previous punch. Let's check down here. Now, what I can do, when I hold my tool right here, I can actually feel the edge of the leather and the distance between the edge and the tool. And let's just work our way out to the edge. Now, we're starting in the center and working our way out, simply so that this is not going to work out perfectly, but we'll have the same distance on the end, and we'll take care of that. Once you get the hang of punching that, it actually moves pretty quickly, okay? So down here, we've got some extra room. Let's do this. On my 1-inch tool, I've got marks inside the tool. Those are roughly 2/3 of the way in. I use these to taper belts. We've got a good video on that. But let's do this. Let's put the top corner of that tool right in the top of that cut, and I'm going to drag that line right over to the edge. Well, there we go. Took care of that. I'll do the same thing down here. Good. Okay, we've got that. That actually looks pretty good. Our next step, let's go over to our 5/8 inch. Yeah, there we go, 5/8 inch English point. Now I'm going to do my best to drop this in. Technically, it's about 1/4 of an inch from this edge. We could drop in a straight edge here and butt this against it, but that's a lot of extra trouble. So let's just do our best to get that centered. And I'm going to give that just about 3/8 of an inch, give or take. Good. That's what we're looking for. I'm going to do the same thing down our line, but again, let's take our time here. Make sure we get a good, even punch. Well, that looks good thus far. I'm going to do the same thing to the other piece. And that looks good. Now, we could do one at a time, but I like to do all the steps that are similar all at one time, because when we jump over to our next piece, we're already up to speed. We're already practiced, okay? Over to our 5/16 inch punch. And again, we've got to pay attention here. What I'm going to do is do my best to get the edge of that punch right in the end of that cut. And let's flip it around, do the same thing on this side. And our heart piece drops out. Well, there we go. That's pretty cool. Going to do the same thing on the balance. Okay, we've got that. Let's see if those shake out. Good, there we go. Now once in a while, one's not going to want to come off. We can simply use our knife to clip that off, or if we're a little bit ragged there. But all told, that looks pretty good. Okay, same thing on the other piece. And there we go. Well, I could have had a little better punch. Say right here, it's a little offset. Same down here, I got a little piece of debris there. But all told, that looks good. Okay, let's go over to our main table, add some glue. We've actually got 2 ways to go here. Both are going to look great. But here's what I'm talking about. So, normally, we would think of our top grain as the exterior for our clutch. So we drop our suede in and bring our flap down to about right there. Okay, well that looks pretty good. But what I'd like to do, and I think this looks just a little bit better, let's go with our flesh side for the exterior on our clutch. We'll drop in our suede, and then let's bring our flap down like that. There we go. I really like the top grain across the throat, but I also like the contrast here between the flesh side to top grain and then our flesh side in here. The reason I say this is because now we know we need glue on our flesh side on our main body. On our suede, doesn't really matter, okay? So here's the easiest way to do this. We're gonna glue our suede first. So let's take, you know what, in fact, let's back up because I got a sample. I don't think we're gonna be able to see what I'm talking about on this lighter leather. So here's what we're going to do. Let's take our suede brush and I'm gonna brush my suede. Get that to stand up for me. Good, okay. Now let's take our main body, lay it down, and I'm gonna use my square to press that down. Good. Okay, so let's peel that back. Yeah, there we go. We know exactly where we want our glue. We need our glue everywhere but inside this little heart shape. Now, we're not going to sew this. I want my glue right to the edge, but we're going to run off the edge, so that's not an issue, okay? So now I'm going to jump over. Let's do the same thing, but with our lighter suede. Now, when I lay this on, I want these two edges to be flushed with the two edges on my suede, and I want that about 1/4 inch in. That gives us room for error there, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, there we go. Now, again, I was worried that the camera would not pick that up. I can see that, but I don't think the camera can, okay? Let's add glue here. Now, again, we want this everywhere but inside our little heart. Well, there's two ways we can go, actually three. This is our pattern sheeting. I punched this with a 5/8 inch punch. I can lay that right there and glue around it. The problem is we're going to get glue on this and we're going to transfer it, okay? Another way to go, we all have the Tubbo brushes, right? And let's see if we can find the worst brush, and we can always add this or add our contact cement with this, okay? But let's do this. Let's lay that right on the edge of our table. I'm going to take my contact cement. Now, we don't have to get exactly up to the edge of that heart, but I do want it, again, across the bottom. So let's take our glue and let's just work outside of our heart. And there we go. That's really all we need. Okay, let's set that aside. Now on our flesh side, let's come in from the top of our curve here. I'm just going to come in about 1/4 inch. We'll never see this. So if we get glue a little over that line, doesn't matter. But let's just drop in a scribed line. Good. That's the edge of our glue. Now let's do the same thing over here, but we've got to be careful. Let's don't get glue on our table and then push our project across it. Okay, that looks good. So let's give these two pieces about 10 minutes, let that glue set. We've given both pieces a little time to dry, so let's take this piece, flip this over, and again, let's try to line that up. There we are. Okay, let's press this down. In fact, let's go back to our square. And there we are. We've got no glue on the inside of our hearts, exactly what we're looking for. I'm going to do the same thing to this piece. Well, those look good, and we feel like we've got a good bond now. If we've got a little extra suede on either end, we can trim that absolutely, okay? So back over to our punch table, let's hit this with our 1 inch one more time. These look a little rough at this point because we can see the glue. Makes it look terribly inconsistent. When we hit this with our English point, it's going to be beautiful. So let's do exactly the same thing. Now I'm going to use my top grain actually as my guide. I can feel my English point sit right down on the edge of that. Okay, let's do the same thing all the way down. And down to our last. Okay, Let's flip this around and punch this just like we did the first time. And there we are. Well, doesn't that look good? And how easy is that? So again, even if you don't have these exact tools, pick up your tools, see what happens. No telling what direction we can go. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And there we are. Our second is ready to go. Okay, so let's reset here. We're going to sew our flaps down. We do not need a sewing machine to sew leather and do a beautiful job of it. In fact, we're going to prove it. So right here on our pattern, I've got a dotted line here. This is 1/4 of an inch. Actually, it's a little bit more because we're giving ourselves a little room for error. But that's about 1/4 of an inch below this cut. Now, if we're doing a standard clutch, I'm going to come out 1 3/4 of an inch, and we're just going to bend that flap back to that line. Well, this is a little bit different. Actually, it's not. Let's just use our corner right there. We're going to bring that corner down to our edge, and then we'll sew across there, okay? So with a scribe and our square, let's come in from these two cuts, just about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a hair more, and let's just scribe a line. Okay, good. Let's go with our double-sided tape. Love this. This is actually the wider tape because I want to get a good bond across here. We don't want these things moving around when we chisel and we sew. So let's drop in some tape. Good, we've got that. Okay, so let's bring this over, and I want to bring this point just a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch on either side. Well, that looks good. Okay, we can always use our square. Let's press that tape down, but let's don't ding our leather. Okay, good. Now, I want a line between this edge and this corner. So let's do our best to get that right there, and now let's scribe that line. Easy enough thus far, okay? So now let's jump over to our chisel. We're going to go with our diamond. This is the 5mm, gives us a pretty stitch line. Again, this will be visible, so let's really make it look good. So down here, I'm going to start on this end. I'm going to come in just 1 chisel length. I'm going to run my hand across the bottom and make sure I've got chisel all the way through. Good, that'll make it easier on us when we start to sew. So let's pull this out, work it out easily. Now, first time, last hole, right in that guide. And 1 more 6. Now let's jump down to a 4 tine because we just need 2 more holes. There we go. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to do the same thing to our other piece. And we look good there as well. Okay, let's go knock in a pretty stitch. We're not going to go into great detail on hand sewing, but for the new folks, let's at least hit the high points, okay? Let's start with our stitching pony. This is the biggest help to us when we're hand sewing. It's going to keep our work right in front of us, make it comfortable. That's a big point. Secondly, on our needles, my favorite. This is the John James. This is the number 18. It's the smallest of the 3, but again, my favorite needle. And on our thread, if we haven't had to make enough decisions already, we have got some beautiful colors that would look good on this. Now, we don't have a good matching color for our aqua suede, but oddly enough, right there, our deer lace, I love our deer lace. We see this in videos. That's a good match. Now, in designing this project for this video, I almost went with a Spanish basket weave across here. That would be gorgeous. But I have a real problem blowing projects out of the ballpark. Let's keep it simple. So on our thread, we're going to go with a 0.8 40mm Ritza, and we're going to go with our beige. Now we're using our diamond chisel. So what we're going to do, let's start in our first hole, and I'm going to come through from my top grain, always from my top grain. Let's bring one needle through. Let's equal out our distance. Good. Now our next stitch, I'm going to always start from my front. Let's bring that through and draw that down. Now I want to draw that enough to where I can see that thread sink just a little bit down into the top grain. But we've got a problem when we're sewing chromes, because they can be a little bit more supple. We've got a trick for that. Okay, second needle, I'm going to hold my first needle up, then I'm going to come through behind that and basically below that. So let's pull that through. And let's give that a little bit of tension. Okay, next stitch, same thing. Going to start from my top grain, pull that through and up. Second needle is going to come right behind that because our hole, it's already opened up. Okay, so let's get about 4 or 5 stitches in here. Well, that looks good thus far. Now, I said it's a little bit different when we're sewing chrome tans because they don't have the body of a veg tan. If I add too much tension here, this is going to ripple. It's going to look terrible. So let's do this. With each stitch, let's add a little tension. But then about every 4 or 5, let's take both pieces of our thread, let's hold this in, and now pull tight. There we go. So that gives us good tension without a ripple, okay? I'm going to sew down to our end and we'll hide a knot. When we're new to leathercraft, our first thought, when we talk about hand sewing, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be tedious, it's going to be hard on our hands. Actually, this probably took about 5 minutes. It's a good looking stitch. We'll actually have to tell people this is hand sewn. So let's tighten that down. Now, on our last hole, I'm going to come through just from our front 2 plies, through our face leather and our suede. Let's pull that through. Now, this back needle, again, let's just come through that 1 hole or 1 ply. Okay, there we are. Now we're going to tie a square knot. So right over left, circle around, and let's draw that down in there. Now left over right, circle around, and draw that down in. Now let's don't give that too much tension. Again, we don't want that to ripple on us. So now let's take our knife. I really should have trimmed that a little bit closer. But let's take this and I'm going to pull my thread across the blade so I don't cut into my project. Okay? Well, actually, all told, that looks pretty good. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing to this side. And we've got another pretty stitch line. Now, 2 things I didn't mention. Well, first off, I want to go about 4 times my length on my thread. Because if we think about it, we're actually going further left to right than we are lengthwise. But the last thing, this is not fatiguing our hands simply because we got the full width of the tine through our leather. So you notice our needles just slide through, makes the whole thing very easy and very fast. Okay, let's step back to our main table. We're ready to put this together. This is going to look odd because we typically think of our top grain out, but since we're going to have our flesh side out, what we need to do is tape and sew flesh to flesh, top grain out. Now when I do that, my first thought is, I have led us in the wrong direction. That leather is beautiful. We'll definitely use the Redrock again. But here's where I'm going with this. So for tape, we're going to tape one side. Now we're going to use a corner knife, the largest. This is the 40mm. So that's going to take off a good bit of our corner. Let's not waste tape. Let's just bring our tape down to about here, from here across to there, and from there up. Now, let's go with the thinner tape. This is the 3/32 because we're going to sew this and reverse it out. I don't want to see tape on the outside. So let's tape our 3 sides. Good, we've got that. Now, this is the one place in leathercraft where our edges do not have to meet up perfectly, but let's get as close as we can. Okay, good. Let's use our corner knife and clip our corners. Good, we've got that. Okay, let's step over to our 303, put in a stitch line. This is the Weaver 303. If we've seen some videos where we sew, this is what I sew on. I love this machine. If you want to jump up to an industrial machine, easy to thread, easy to maintain, and the best part, we can slow our stitches down to about 1 stitch per second. For those of us who are not production sewers, that means we have total control. So let's start right here. I'm just going to go with black thread. I've got that loaded. Again, we'll never see this edge. I'm going to come down about 3/4 of an inch so we can get a good back stitch on that. Good. Now let's hold our thread and let's drop one in. I'm going to hold my reverse and let's back up. And there we go. One more stitch. Let's do a back stitch. One more and we are good. Good, let's take this over, reverse this out, add our frame, and we're done. Our first step here, let's reverse this out. Well, that looks good thus far. Nice job on this. Now, the easiest step in the whole process. So we're going to go with a spring frame, or technically a facile frame, the 11-inch. Great part about this, for the visible hardware, we've got nickel and brass. So on these, we've got basically a male and a female end. I'm going to take the male end, loop on the inside, and let's push that through. We've got a good pattern. That slid right through there, okay? Let's flip left to right. I'm going to do the same thing, male end first. Good, okay? Now to set these. This small pin makes all the difference in the world. I have tried every one of these tools to try to set these without that. Absolute fail on each one. Now, this is just my opinion, but when you get the little setting pins, get 3. Well, first off, we're going to lose one immediately. Secondly, the cat's going to knock one off the table. That leaves us one to work with. That is simple leathercraft math. So, with our spring frames or facile frames, we get tubular rivets. Now, we've got to order the setting pins separately, but let's put our tubular rivet right on the end. And now, let's just press that together. We don't really have to press hard. There we go. We don't have to press hard because the point of the setting tool is going to push that through. Okay, let's scoot that, and there we are. How easy is that? If you've tried any of those other tools, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So right here, we've got a setter. Basically looks like a line 20 or a line 24 setter. So let's just roll the end of that down just enough. We don't want to press that so hard that it compresses the spring. Maybe one more. Good. See how it curved around? Maybe I can add just one more hit to that. There we go. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to do the same thing on this end. And there we are. Our clutch is complete. That actually looks good in our spring frame. Very nice, very useful, and good looking. I think that is just the coolest border design, and I've been dying to find a place where we can use it. Now, big point, and we talked about this, we're using some tools that are uncommon sizes. May not have these in our shop. That's okay. Let's pick up what we do have, a little scrap, let's play with it, and I hope you create something beautiful. Good luck with your projects.